For more, I am joined in studio now by Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, former IDF international spokesman, as well as senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, as well as our I24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the Rundown today. Jonathan, major visit coming from Donald Trump to the region. Israel not on the list of countries that he will be visiting, but how can Israel ensure that it benefits the most from Trump's major trip to Saudi Arabia? There's so much on the agenda, so much that could indirectly and directly impact Israel. So how should Israel be playing this diplomacy game?
Well, many things can go right, and I also fear that a few things can go wrong. What concerns me is actually not only what's happening now in this trip, which I think is tremendously important, but I'm also looking beyond that trip and what's going to happen in June. There is a big looming French, European, Arab, including Saudi, and UN so-called peace initiative, where they basically have already said, Macron and others have already said, that the outcome of the summit that they're planning, the joint Saudi-French summit that they're planning, is for a two-state solution to be forced upon Israel and to some degree the Palestinians. And I make linkage between that in June and what's going on now, because I think that the two things are connected. I think that at the end of the day, what we're looking to understand now is, will there be American pressure to force Israel to provide humanitarian aid without getting any significant in return? I think that the IDF is more or less ready to move in, establish those safe areas, and to provide the aid in, and then for American companies to actually distribute it to Palestinians. I think maybe people think that that will decrease instability and tensions. My assessment is exactly the opposite. I think that that will spike significant Hamas violence, because that will be a threat to Hamas's rule. And all of the people who are saying that, we have to supply food in order to alleviate the situation, that's fine. But I think that the first thing that will happen is that Hamas will actually enhance their operations. It is tempting to assess and to conclude from President Trump's itinerary that there are things afoot between President Trump and
some daylight growing between the two leaders.
It's tempting to think so, but at the time being, I believe Ambassador Huckabee, and I think that the level of communication at the professional and what I understand also at the political levels is solid. But at the end of the day, what matters are the results. If unpleasant, bad strategic surprises are sprung on Israel as a result of this visit, then I think we should make political conclusions and act accordingly.
So a lot rides off of this visit. Now, Ariel, you've been speaking to some of your sources about Trump's plans in Saudi Arabia, and that includes signing a civilian nuclear deal. What details can you share?
Yeah, this is something big that the Saudis have wanted for a long time, and up until recently, it was coupled with normalization with Israel, but that appears to have changed. According to a Saudi source close to the royal court who speaks with me today, it is expected that the United States and Saudi Arabia will sign an agreement to cooperate on developing a civil nuclear program for the kingdom. This will happen during Trump's visit later this week. Now, as we mentioned, this agreement will not include any steps regarding normalization with Israel, as was reported last week by Reuters. Now, this comes amid growing frustration among the Saudis with regards to Israel's policy toward the Israeli government's policy toward the Palestinians. Now, the Saudi source acknowledged that such an agreement might be subject to congressional review, potentially challenging its ratification. However, according to this source, if the U.S. fails to implement this agreement to begin a civil nuclear program for the Saudis, Riyadh will turn to China for assistance on the matter, and this would strike a major blow to long-standing Saudi-U.S. relations.
What does this mean for Israel then? You talk about that diplomacy, Jonathan, and how Israel might play this and the actions that can come from this. If Israel is sidelined from a deal, something that we didn't see under U.S. President Joe Biden, something that we didn't see under U.S. President Donald Trump's first term in office, if that happens, this week. What does that mean for Israel's plans for this long-awaited normalization?
Well, I think that there is a striking mismatch between what many countries in Europe and in the region want for the outcome to be of the October 7 attack against Israel and the war that has ensued, and what Israel is willing to agree to and to concede. Israel, I think currently, its leadership, and I believe most of the population, still is determined to actually win this war and actually defeat Hamas in order to prevent them from ever having the ability to do so again and from ever posing a threat from the Gaza Strip. The Saudis, most of the Europeans, and many other Arab states, and of course the UN, they see that differently, and they would rather have the outcome of the October 7 war with a Palestinian state, whether it's, by the way, without mentioning disarmament of Hamas or Hamas not having a future in the Gaza Strip. And yes, I think that certain Israeli diplomatic weaknesses are exposed. I definitely hope that is not what's going to happen, because I think that would be a tremendous travesty for the October 7 attack to end with Palestinian statehood under a facade of Palestinian technocrats, but really Hamas behind the scenes. That I think would be something extremely regrettable, and I don't think Israel will agree to it.
Now, interesting news that we're also finding out about who exactly President Trump plans to meet with in Saudi Arabia. It's not just the Saudi officials, also Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, also Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, and the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun. All of these leaders expected to be in Saudi Arabia. Ariel, what is the significance of all of these different Arab leaders going to Saudi Arabia?
Right. So the key event of this visit is Trump's meeting with the Gulf states, but there are tag-alongs to this visit, as you mentioned, Syria, Palestinian Authority, and Lebanon. Now, we originally reported back in early April about on Trump's expected meeting with al-Sharaa. No one thought it was going to happen, but we see in the Middle East things changed very quickly. What al-Sharaa wants, he wants sanctions relief. He wants basically what we saw in his visit to Paris, where he got a statement from French President Macron that the EU is expected to lift sanctions from Syria. They can't do that until the U.S. does that. So they want to see, this is what al-Sharaa wants to get from Trump. What Palestinian President Abbas wants, he hopes that the United States will resume aid to the PA, something that stopped under the Taylor Force Act. And now with the Palestinian Authority trying to show reforms in the way that the pay-for-slay policy for payments to the families of terrorists or terrorists themselves who have committed attacks against Israeli civilians or soldiers. The PA has announced that they have changed, that they have stopped this policy. In reality, they just shifted the way it's written down in the books, but that's what they want to see. And as for President Aoun, he wants to see continued U.S. support. The Deputy Middle East Envoy, Morgan Ortegas, who has been visiting Lebanon numerous times, she's been a very vocal voice on the importance of disarmament of Hezbollah. This is a key American demand. It is also a demand from the Saudis and other Gulf partners that until Hezbollah disarmed, they will not begin supporting Lebanon financially. And so there's a lot of issues up in the air, and everyone's trying to get a piece of Trump.
In addition to that, to what Ariel is saying, I think that the Palestinian goals are Palestinian state and to take control over the Gaza Strip and to use the American president's visit in order to further that aim, and that is what Mahmoud Abbas has been publicizing. And I think that the Syrian race is really about which Western country gets to supply weapons and make weapons deals. The French took the first steps long before any other Western country. They were the first Western country to accept Sharia and grant him a visit. And they're probably itching and eager to supply the Syrians with weapons. I suppose that is also part of the general consideration of what's going on with that visit as well. To me, the most important person attending the meeting is Mahmoud Abbas, because that really puts a totally different context into the meeting, and that makes it worrying that there's no Israeli present and to influence events.
A lot of these other voices quickly.
Yeah, just very quickly, I agree with Jonathan, the eyeing to the west, but we have to remember this is taking place in Saudi Arabia. Syria, #1 foreign policy issue, Lebanon next after that, and they're trying to show support for the Palestinian Authority. We can't forget the significant role that Saudi Arabia is playing here.
All right, we're going out for a quick break here on The Rundown. Stay with us in just 3 minutes. We'll be right back on I24 News. Still with me in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus. Jonathan, as we hear about the positive news, it seems, at least from the United States and Iran's perspective, what does that mean for Israel? Is this good or bad news for Israel if these talks, which it seems they are, continue?
Well, let's go back to basics. The American president, his national security advisor, the Secretary of State, and various other key officials have said very clearly that the end of these negotiations are going to be a civil nuclear program in Iran without enrichment capabilities in Iran. That is key. And I think it's important that we stress that factor. As long as the Iranians have domestic enrichment capabilities, it's only a matter of decision and very short time before they take 3.67% enrichment and turn it into 90% purity. It's a matter of maybe a few weeks until that is done. And that's something that I think we are past understanding that Iran cannot have. Now, what the Iranians are doing is, in my mind, masterfully using the negotiations in order to shield themselves from an Israeli strike on their nuclear facilities. And they're very good at negotiations. I think they're probably the best negotiators in the world, very well understanding what makes the other side tick and what the other side wants to achieve. I think they appreciate that, and they are maneuvering accordingly. But at the end of the day, we are at a crossroads where the Islamic Republic, which has an outspoken goal and even a countdown clock, where they want to annihilate the state of Israel, they are at the weakest point that they have been in maybe 20 years. And I think that there is an opportunity to act quickly and to tell the Iranians it's either this or that. It's either you dismantle your nuclear military program and you agree to full disarmament of any enrichment capability and full inspection of those capacities in Iran, or the other option is to use military force. And what the Iranians are doing is delaying and using time and international politics very cleverly in order to prevent that from happening. And every day that is wasted, I think, is a shame, because at the end of the day, the Iranians are still focused on retaining nuclear military capabilities.
They are these master negotiators.
They are indeed.
Well, meanwhile, Jonathan, the news of this incredible discovery from the IDF efforts to return Zvi Feldman 40 years later. What does this even say about Israel's commitment to continue to find and recover all of the bodies that have died fighting for the state of Israel beyond enemy lines, efforts that have continued for 4 decades at this point?
Yeah, sadly, there are still quite a few left, far too many, of soldiers whose burial place is unknown. That's how they're officially coined in Hebrew. And I think it's moving, and I'm happy to see that even though 40 years have passed, the establishment, Mossad, IDF, Defense Ministry, and the Special Directorate that is part that is really focused on exactly doing this, bringing the remains of Israelis back home, at least for proper burial, that they're working, that they're resourced, that they're capable, and eventually deliver. So that's commendable, and let's hope that we won't have to do this anytime in the future, and that we get all of our people back much, much faster.
Let's certainly hope so. Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, as well as our I24 News correspondent, our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Thank you for both of your analysis and joining us as always.
Thank you.